My very dear Sarah, the indications are that we shall move in a few days. And since it may be that I will never be able to write to you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I'm dead. That's how he started his letter to his wife. It was July 14, 1861. And a man named Sullivan Ballou from Rhode Island was at an army encampment near Washington, D.C. The Civil War had burst across the American landscape with bloody results. And the future of the nation, which came to birth on July 4, 1776, was very much in doubt that summer. Sullivan Ballou from Rhode Island did not picture himself a hero. He had 2 sons and a wife back home. He had served a little time in the state legislature. But when the war broke out, he volunteered to serve. And with thousands of others, Ballou endured the heat and cold of military life, the disease, the horrible sanitary conditions, and food. And in July of 1861, it became clear that the armies of North and South would soon face each other in battle in Northern Virginia. Sweltering in the July heat and facing his own mortality, Sullivan Ballou wrote a letter to his wife, and in that letter, he said the following: Sarah, I know that American civilization now depends on our victory. We owe a great debt to those who went before us, through the blood and sufferings of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down my life and to pay the debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless, and it binds me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. And yet, my love for country comes over me like a strong wind and bear me irresistibly to the battlefield. I hope you are listening to what Sullivan Ballou wrote in 1861 and what he's saying to his wife. He understands what's at stake in that national conflict, and he recalls those who sacrificed so that our nation could be born. And Sullivan Ballou writes eloquent words of love to his wife, and he writes about his love for the country. And you can almost feel the tension in his heart and in his words. He loves his family, but in that moment of history, he feels called to serve something even bigger than himself, even bigger than his family, even bigger than his own life. And Sullivan Ballou, that young man from Rhode Island, concludes his amazing letter with these tender words to his wife. He wrote, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they love, then I will always be near you, in the glad days and in the dark nights. And if there is a soft breeze upon your cheek, it will be my breath. Sarah, do not think of me as dead. Think of me as gone. I'm waiting for you, for we will meet again. Sullivan Ballou died a week later at the First Battle of Bull Run. His wife received this letter 4 months after his death. And the first time I heard these words was in a Ken Burns Civil War history TV show, at the end of the very first episode. I listened to this letter, and they had beautiful violin music in the background. And I sat there on my couch and I cried. I cried because this young man from Rhode Island eloquently expressed something that men and women of every generation have felt, and they struggled with, and they have sought ways to express it. The young man from Rhode Island genuinely loved his family and his friends, and he genuinely loved his life. And yet, he felt called to sacrifice for something bigger than himself, even if that meant that he had to let go of family and relationships and even his life. It wasn't the first or last time that people have felt that. In 1776, there were women and men in America who were willing to sacrifice everything, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, because they believed in something bigger than themselves, a new kind of freedom, a new kind of nation. In 1861, there were women and men in America who were willing to sacrifice everything because they believe in something bigger than themselves, as our nation convulsively dealt with the horrible legacy of slavery. In 1941, there were women and men in America who were willing to sacrifice everything because they believed in something bigger than themselves, as Nazi and Japanese tyranny had to be conquered. In 1961, there were Americans who made sacrifices because they believed in something bigger than themselves, as President Kennedy invited a new generation to join the Peace Corps and go abroad to make a difference. Whether it's soldiers who risk everything in Korea, Vietnam, or Middle East, whether it's aid workers and diplomats who volunteer to go on the tough assignments, whether it's young people who decide to become police officers or firefighters against their family's wishes, or whether it's a talented young man who gives up medical school so that he can go to the seminary and become a priest, or the talented young woman who gives up the business career in order to teach in the inner city. We are often inspired by women and men who feel called to serve something bigger than themselves, even if that means they have to sacrifice the support of family or safety. There was a talented young man from Galilee who also felt called to sacrifice everything so that he could serve something bigger than himself. His parents did not always understand what he was doing, and local leaders took offense at his words and deeds, and he put himself in danger. But this young man from Galilee, who had been born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, knew that his life would only make sense by serving something, actually in this case, serving someone bigger than himself. And that young man, Jesus, says in today's gospel, "Whoever loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever doesn't take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me." At first, frankly, I think those words sound harsh. If you love your parents more than me, you are not worthy. If you love your children more than me, you are not worthy. But notice that Jesus never says, don't love your family. In fact, there's a lot of other places where he tells us to do just that. Rather, I think in the passage this morning, Jesus is inviting us also to fall in love with something bigger than ourselves, even bigger than our families, bigger than our present dreams. When we fall in love that way, we are willing to sacrifice and serve. and follow that dream wherever it leads. And of course, Jesus is not referring in this gospel to any single nation or political cause. And he's not asking everyone to start a military career. Rather, Jesus in this passage is inviting all of us, everyone, to consider the possibility that we could fall in love with the Lord and His gospel. We so fall in love that we are willing to spend the rest of our lives putting the gospel first, putting Jesus first, making His truth our priority. When people dedicate their lives to a single cause, we often call them heroes. When people do that for the gospel, we call them saints. This week, as we celebrate Independence Day, I invite you to please take time and thank God for the people who have helped make our nation what it is. A beacon of freedom with a flawed past. A nation of generous people who are also imperfect human beings. A nation that has done a lot for humanity and which still has much to do for our humanity. Let's all join in praying for our nation, our government, and every neighbor. On a personal note, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Steve is over there, Steve Giffoni, who has served our parish so well as our parish director for the past 9 months as a full-time volunteer. Please join me in showing our appreciation to Steve. And Laurie, his wife, thank you very much. Steve understands what's at stake at this moment of our parish history. Although we are strong and healthy right now, there's much work that needs to be done now. So if we want our parish to be around in 10 years' time and beyond for our children and grandchildren. Steve loves his family, and Steve loves the Lord and this parish of St. Anthony. In your prayers this week, I ask all of you to consider the possibility that you sacrifice and serve our parish more than what you are currently doing right now. There's no one greater than Jesus worth serving.